For coming. My name is Julian, and I'll be introducing, as I am now, this talk tonight, given by Otto, not Professor Rössler, by Otto. That's how we'd like to be known. So, as you heard before, he would like to speak in English. I'm sure that if at the end of the talk anyone would like to ask a question in Deutsch, then it'd be certainly possible to organise that and spontaneous translation for the rest. So tonight we're going to be talking about a particularly difficult object of thought. You can argue that we're actually talking about a crisis of sorts, but a crisis caused by an object which is very unstable in the human imagination and also in science. And that's the object, as it's referred to as a black hole, which still, by and large, exists as a series of concepts, mathematical, quantum, and also pop science fiction that possibly describe it in the mind and how it might work in operation. Largely, black holes reside purely in the imaginary, whether that be the scientific imaginary or the pop scientific imaginary. We all have an image in our minds of what a black hole may or may not look like. Most importantly, black holes are pretty much entirely misunderstood, or as yet not totally understood. There are still many great unknowns with this phenomenon called a black hole that are desperately in wait of growth, and particularly in the area of quantum mechanics, or in search of a theory called, for instance, quantum gravity, which would seek to bring Einstein's relativity in line with that of quantum mechanics. The black hole concept was introduced by a chap called Mitchell in 1783, I believe, and he expressed it in a letter. The possibility that light, when approaching a mass of significant density, might actually appear to sort of disappear toward that mass, or slow down, such as the very inner workings of that gravitational containment might become very difficult to observe. But it wasn't until 1916 when Einstein came along and proposed his theory of general relativity that this concept started to take a little bit more form. And Einstein actually proposed that if there was a large enough mass within a significantly small amount of space, that all paths through space itself, so he was actually implying a space-time continuum, a fabric, if you like, would actually warp toward the center of that volume. Now that's extraordinarily difficult to imagine. I mean, it's all very well written down, it's all very well operating as a series of mathematical extrapolations, but it is nonetheless very difficult to actually consider. There was, for instance, for some years, right until 1958, this idea that time would somehow be sort of stopped. That time, that the black hole, of course, not as an object but as a process, would actually warp this continuum so much that time would actually cease to continue moving forward. But it was Finkelstein who broke with this idea by proposing this thing called the event horizon, which is very, very important, at least I believe, in Otto's talk tonight. Understanding what an event horizon is and how it works, I'm sure would be valuable here, and maybe Otto and I can together cover that ground if anyone's a little bit stuck on it. Yes, so within this idea of there being such a thing called a black hole, the concept's been fleshed out mathematically and otherwise over the years, such that now there are understood to be several types of possible black hole. There's the supermassive black holes, there's black holes of intermediate mass, and there's also these things called micro black holes. And it's of this last type, the micro black hole, that in the Large Hadron Collider there will be an attempt to actually produce a black hole of this type. It's here that, for instance, science will engage in a very, very curious and contradictory practice of creating an object in order to be able to observe it. Creating an object which has not yet been observed in nature in order to observe it. Now, that's a very, very curious double bind of senselessness that I think is quite important here. So again, it's unstable even in hypothesis. It makes no sense as a proposition. by a curious inversion of logic, those at the Hadron Super Collider would therefore want to therefore make it exist. There's a lot you could say there, of course. Interestingly enough, though a micro black hole has never been observed in nature, it's theoretically probable that thousands and thousands of micro black holes actually are formed as cosmic rays strike the Earth's atmosphere every day, and this may have happened for billions of years. In fact, it would take about a quarter of a second or so, it's understood, for one of these micro black holes to pass through the Earth from one side to the other, probably through people's bodies and all sorts of things in that time, and then just keep on moving. The important problem, or one of the important problems with the experiment at the Large Hadron Collider, is this idea that when the black hole is created, this micro black hole, that it would actually be at rest. And by at rest, that means that within a relativistic sense, it will have the possibility to grow, or it may have some possibility to actually take in contents from its environment and expand, if you like. It will exist long enough to actually continue growing. There's several tests or several commissioned audits or researchers into this topic have actually suggested it's extraordinarily dangerous. 98% of those questioned, I think it was it in Europe, actually oppose it entirely. Many people in the scientific community also oppose it. And it's only early this year, I think, that the very last commissioned research into problematizing this experiment will actually be finished. I don't think it's even been published yet. And this, of course, will just be a matter of months before the experiment is actually performed. So, this problem, of course, of an object actually, a process, if you like, sucking in matter from its environment, naturally pulls up or inspires the worst of nightmares. I mean, we have no tools for understanding the very inner workings of a black hole, so even on that scientific basis alone, you could argue that it's a dangerous premise to begin the process of actually making one. Nonetheless, I'm sitting next to a man who knows a vast amount more about this topic than I do, and so I would like to give the microphone to the very esteemed Mr. Rössler, Otto, as we will know him from here on, and welcome, Otto.
You are much too kind. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Julian. You see, all the scientific portion of I wanted to talk about has already been covered. Now I have a much easier life. I will walk over there and draw a little while I'm talking, if it is okay with you. Thanks. Now, I have a new microphone. Is it on? Yeah. Thank you. You see, for me, as being just a poor scientist, scientists are always poor compared to artists. Not as much as money is concerned. The state is more interested in scientists if they are obedient, but in terms of freedom of thinking. And so, to me, a very hard word today to come to grips with is this word. I guess it's still there. And actually, I wrote down one sentence with which I wanted to start. Conspire rhymes on desire. And people can do wonderful things with each other. So, and so maybe desire is more dangerous to mention, but Now, the second sentence is almost as important. I forgot it. But you see, there is the word conspire is very difficult to understand what it really means, or it presupposes something. And I thought it's one of my hobbies to think about biology a lot. Conspiring presupposes something which only human beings can do. Animals cannot conspire, as far as we know. And why? So conspire contains an element of interaction which is unique to humans, but to us it is completely self-evident. Small children can already conspire. It's much fun to conspire with the father to surprise mother with something, for example. But so what would be the deep precondition for being able to conspire? And of course we talk only about conspiring in a good sense. The evil part of the world is less interesting, even though unfortunately it still has not been eliminated. But we can do something in that direction. So conspiring depends on understanding something. You can conspire with someone else only if a certain relationship exists. And this relationship can be understood theoretically. Maybe. And whether this theoretical understanding, whether this is science or whether it is art, I don't know. Because theory has no character, so to speak. It can be scientific, but it can also be more important than scientific. And I don't know whether this, what I have in mind here, I'm driving at a word called benevolence, or understanding of benevolence. And benevolence is a very unusual word because it is no longer used in society. Most people don't know what benevolence means. In German it is Wohlwollen. And in every language, it exists in all languages, European languages at the moment, and of course not just the European languages, but it has come out of fashion. Because people didn't realize how important it is to understand benevolence. And only people who know that the other is with them in a special relation, so that benevolence is justified, so that they can trust. Trust is another word, but trust is less than benevolence. Trust is something which also a dog can have toward his master. And toward another dog who is higher ranking, and in a fight he might even expose his neck, his throat, to the more higher ranking animal, and it trusts that the other will accept this sign of how is it called in German, Demutsgebärde, the sign of bowing down, will be respected, and he will then become subdued, but at the same time he can be trusted also by the other who spared his life. So trust is much less human than benevolence. Trust you can have without knowing that the other side is benevolent. For example, we usually trust our cars, but we would never say that our car is benevolent. But if we trust a person, it's not like trusting a car or a slave. And so benevolence, I don't know what benevolence is, but I wanted to share this with you, that it's a suspicion. Because you can never prove that someone else is benevolent, because he might just be scheming, he might just be pretending. And the suspicion of benevolence is something very positive. It is, you cannot prove it, but by suspecting benevolence, you become the master, very strangely. Because you impose to the other a position which might not be actually there. And this is called, In German it's called Rührung. I apologize for coming up with German words first. In English, Rührung is to be moved or to be... there are several words for that. But I talked about Rührung, if I might introduce this word into English, as from an example. Once my little son came up, did something very nice, and he knew I would be very pleased. And he asked me, are you now completely durchgerührt, completely stirred up, like Rührei, like, what is Rührei? This is scrambled eggs. And so Rührung is really turning you around in your mind several times. And you can be gerührt, you can be moved in your mind, in your heart, by suspecting someone to be benevolent, even if he not really is at the moment. And he will be hard-pressed to let you down. I mean, he will not dare letting you down, because being gerührt, being moved, is such an honor. If someone really trusts you to be so kind, then you have never been taken so seriously in your life, you know. So you would do anything to fulfill this belief, even if it's wrong. And so this idea of benevolence, it is an attribution. If benevolence is attributed, the poor receiver of this attribution is virtually powerless. And this is a general situation with artificial intelligence, with the situation when you have an artificial universe in your computer, for example. I have a co-worker, Hans Diebner, who succeeded first in putting a whole universe into a computer, and it was a reversible universe. And within such a reversible universe, one could eventually also have artificial intelligences. It would be they would be more complicated than if you just build computers and program them to be intelligent. But these artificial intelligences would then there's the question, can you have this feature of benevolence in a computer, in an artificial world? But I suggest the answer is yes, but before you can do it, you have to put in what is called a brain equation. And the brain equation is again something which is not very well known, even though it was published 35 years ago now. But people are a little bit afraid of such themes. And so I don't want, it's perhaps not necessary to enter this, but I recently saw a movie which is already 7 years old, AI, by Steven Spielberg. And Stanley Kubrick had also worked on it first. And this is a very charming movie where these poor robots turn out to be really, they are persons, and the viewer is really almost believing that it will someday be possible to create benevolent, understanding machines. And these machines then would not be machines, because understanding benevolence means that you are a person. And we already saw, understanding benevolence is not the same thing as understanding something else, because to understand benevolence, you have to attribute benevolence. And this attribution is something which the one who is benevolent is maybe not worthy of. And especially young children come up with the idea that the mother or the father or the caretaker who is reliable is benevolent. And this suspicion of benevolence of the small children is, in my eyes, the biggest, maybe tragedy if you wish, but also the biggest event in the history of the planet. Because to suspect benevolence as a biological being as an animal, for example, young children, forgive me, have much more in common with an animal first, but then suddenly they come up with this suspicion. And when they attribute the suspicion of benevolence to mom, then they attribute a person property to mom, and by attributing a person property to mom, they become persons themselves. So now I have told you a system of insanity, as I call it, which is just one scientific hypothesis, and not very many people in biology are presently accepting this, what I just told you, even though I published this again in, now it's 30, it's hard to tell, 33 years ago. And also I published it, you see, I'm an old man, I can brag that I had an earlier life. And in this earlier life, I also showed that one can use this theory I just described to you to treat a disease called autism. And many young children could also already have been saved if this theory had been applied, but it is a very scaring theory. So we talk about conspiracy, we talk about scariness. And the idea that you could facilitate, Socrates called it meiotics, I hope this is the right spelling, to help in his dialogues with other people. He tried to help them to give birth. Meiotics is the method to help people give birth to an insight. And this scariness is a feature of meiotics. So only if you get really scared, you understand something. And you can be won over because you are moved in your heart. And what is so scary here, what is so scary is that you could use the same treatment. I didn't tell how the suspicion of benevolence arises in a small child. It is because the smile of the mother, that's the smile of mother, looks just like, it's the really affectionate smile, you know. It looks just like the happy smile of mother, almost like it. And this indistinguishability between these two smiles is only present in human beings. And people who have this later have the disease of autism have a problem understanding facial expressions. And if you know that, you can treat it. Because this misunderstanding that is happiness, happy smile, and the deep smile, no, how do you call it, the friendly smile, this misunderstanding is apparently characteristic of the human species. And if you believe me that this is possible to confuse by certain people, like young children, then you would maybe also believe me that when you make this confusion, one can make a long theory here, but we have no time for that, then you can come up with the suspicion of benevolence. So we are back to this strange topic of benevolence, which I had been introducing to you, even though you expected to be scared to death here in this big room today. And I hope that no one will walk out scared, but everyone will walk out more happy than they went in. But of course, then I would also have many allies. I would no longer be alone with my lonely fight. What is the lonely fight? Yes. No, I have forgotten to mention here something I already alluded to. Why do people not want to understand the origin of personhood in humans? Even if it could help treat young children who would have a very bad life otherwise. For example, children born blind, they cannot see the smile. Most of them remain autists for their lives. The reason one doesn't want to use this therapy is that if this were true, that by this type of cheating, whenever you're happy, you pretend to be friendly, then you could treat in the same manner other animals. For example, an elephant, young elephant, whenever you're happy, and you love him, of course, and then have to make with your left arm or right arm the movement that an elephant mother makes with her trunk towards the child to show her affection. So whenever you are happy, you show affection, so that happiness looks like affection, like friendliness. Then this elephant would start to attribute benevolence to you, the caretaker, and you could teach him to talk and interact with him. And since his brain is bigger than ours, we would have a white elephant on the throne who would become a Buddha. And this is completely unacceptable to society. And I wondered whether the elephant Buddha would be one topic we have successfully covered now. But I recently read a nice book which you might buy. It's quite new, by an art custodian in Belgisch Congo, she's just a poor artist, as she claims. Her name is Pauline and André. And she wrote a book with a very nice title. It's entitled Wild Tenderness. And wild tenderness, it's in French originally. I read it in German. In French it is called la tendresse sauvage. And the la is very nice because it presupposes that everybody knows about this wild tenderness. Oops. I hope you are still not scared, because if someone is producing so much sweet juice, it's going to become dangerous. And maybe you were expecting that we would be doing something together here, which Oswald Berthold recently called whistleblowing. And you know, whistleblowing, I think it's if a thief has stolen something, he is crying someone else, follow the thief or so, and no one thinks that's him. So that's not what I'm intending to do today, whistleblowing, but scaring people is like that. It's closely related to terrorism, you know. If you tell there is a bomb somewhere, it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. This is an act of terrorism. And you must be afraid of me at this moment, that I will tell you something which is, that I tell you there's a bomb somewhere, and that then I should have very good reasons to tell you, because otherwise you can really say, this is unfair. This is not something that anyone is allowed to do, unless it is true. And of course, you never know whether you are true or not in science, because scientists are not omniscient, so you have to be very critical. And therefore I also felt I could give you these kind of scary but nice, this nice story about, yes, what was her name? Pauline André. What did she write in her book on the wild tenderness? The wild tenderness. And she lives in Congo, in Belgisch Congo, and there are very many young children who are starving. These people belong to the poorest of the world. Why? Because they own the biggest mineral store in the world. It's called coltan. Sorry, this sounds like politics. It isn't. Coltan is a mineral, and therefore soldiers have to go there and make sure that the mining can go on, because coltan is in all the handies of the planet. It's a metal. It's a very soft metal, and you need it for very small condensers, which are apparently especially valuable in mobile phones. And for some reason, no one talks about coltan and the richness of the people in the Congo because the whole world takes it out without giving it back to the people to whom it belongs. So that is not very kind, and benevolence is something which doesn't really fit to it. But Pauline André is European. She came to the Congo when she was 4 years old. And then she collected African art. And then when she was already about 50 years old, she once went to a zoo. And in that zoo, I forgot the town in which it was in Congo, there was a little bonobo. So the bonobo is my second topic before the bomb. I mean, before the little black holes, which are we just talk about little black children at the moment, but bonobos are not little black children, they are little apes, as you know. And the bonobo exists only in the Congo. There's no other place in the world where they live. And they happen to be the closest relatives of humans. And if we are talking about human extinction, as we do today, we might just as well also broaden our look and look into the bonobo, the closest relative, which would, of course, when the whole planet disappears, also disappear. And maybe elephants and bonobos do not approve of the experiment at the LHC, but we are not quite there yet. So if you give me a little more time to continue with the story of the wild tenderness before we come to the wild danger. But I didn't want to talk about the wild danger in such terms. So again, it is pushed away for a moment. The bonobos walk on two legs. They're much nicer. First, they were taken to be chimpanzees, but they are different species. For example, their teeth. I once saw a photograph of their teeth. I'm not a dentist, even though I studied medicine, but I had the feeling that a dentist should have a look at the bonobo teeth. Maybe the bonobo has the same teeth structure as humans. And they have other properties in common with humans, but and also they're very cute, of course. Oh, yes, I didn't tell that this little bonobo, his name was Mikeno, opened his arms to this foreign woman who passed by in the zoo in such a way that she couldn't help but take this poor little animal up and cuddle it. And it turned out it was irreversible. So not just this little animal was kind of, how do you say, attached to her, but for some reason her own soul got attached to Mikeno. So eventually she wrote this book because she became, she made sure she had a Save the Bonobo program, especially the bonobo children all over the Congo are being brought to her. And now, why am I making such a fuss about the bonobo? Because the bonobo is not just the closest relative, it has more than 99% of genes in common with humans. It also has features in its behavior which are intimidating and scary. And so, since this is an art conference, maybe I need not be afraid of being a little tactless if I were among scientists only, because artists are different from scientists by being less afraid, as we already saw. And there's a photograph in this book which he doesn't talk about it, except a little bit at the beginning when the family adopted a bonobo, and then the young child, the young boy, suddenly behaved like a young bonobo, and then the family had to give away, hastily, the bonobo. Why? Because the bonobos smile with the lower part of their body. So the smile of the bonobo is very embarrassing to humans. And there is just one photograph in the book, which is the reason I'm mentioning it, where, yeah, it's, how's it called? A mutual masturbation. I apologize. And it's not very clear that there's apparently the one bonobo. There are several hands on the picture, and one hand is apparently making sure that the other hand is not making the wrong movements or so. But if it were true that really among bonobos they have no war, they settle all problems by apparently sexual contact, which may be closer to a smile than sexuality. Because there are many animals where bonding is not shown. Baboons, for example, whenever they want to reassure each other, one is, how do you call it, riding upon the other. And the females are doing the same thing relative to the males. And there are some other animals, the wild African wild dog, where the females even developed a pseudo-penis in order that they could do this ritual. But the ritual has nothing to do with sexuality, it is bonding. And I know of these things because I had many discussions about the inventor of bonding, the discoverer of bonding in the human species. And there are two people who are important here. One is Sigmund Freud, and the other is Konrad Lorenz. And Lorenz said of himself that he had added one more very important drive to Freud's theory. Now, how can I come to our main topic without losing you? This idea of benevolence as the defining feature of humans, because benevolence, understood, implies personhood, is suddenly, due to this first time that anyone in the world presents this question, could it be that these bonobos know about the internal state of the other and therefore can be benevolent? And if they can be benevolent, maybe they can also understand benevolence. And in that case, they would be persons. And so, being a personhood, would be something that would not be uniquely confined to the human species. But we had this already. I just wanted to show you that Wild Tenderness is a book that might interest you, because this woman is really, this book is of a very high scientific standard in biology. I can judge that as a pupil of Lorenz's, even though she did not study anything of the fundamentals. But she is a close friend of Jane Goodall's now, and the people in the field take her very seriously. Okay, but she didn't go as far as I did, attributing personhood to the bonobo. She's just interested in saving the bonobo. And why? Also because the children in the Congo love to be introduced to bonobos and to learn about these animals. And it's the knowledge of children that is really motivating Pauline André. And it is this movement on the planet which is made possible in the revolution of the internet, of the computer, of interactive machines and art. And today information costs almost nothing. And I'm just mentioning in passing Project Lampsacus, which is a project which is not yet available to everyone on the person, even though Lampsacus guarantees the human right. It's the hometown of all persons on the internet. And for today, hometown of all persons is opened up to the bonobo for the first time. But it is denied also to the children in the Congo and to most children on the planet. And when Ezer Weizmann in Israel, together with a minister of Saudi Arabia, had promised me to set up Lampsacus about 10 years ago, then he was ousted from his office because people found that he had not paid his taxes 10 years earlier in France once. And so Namsakus is really so tactless. If you're giving every person on the planet the right to have any information, and the pyramid of knowledge, where every knowledge is prepared in such a way that it's not just the original information, we will talk about the original information of black holes immediately, but also the meta-information is there. And you can explain to a child, which is the shortest piece of the information, and you don't talk about the main thing you want to talk about towards a child. You just tell him or her what is similar to the one thing you want to explain to the child. And the child suddenly says, you don't need to explain to me. It already, from the other examples, has formed in his own mind the picture of you try to explain to him, and you don't need to do it anymore. So that's I call the pyramid. It's originally a military invention in surveillance planes, where you have a very exact photograph of the ground, where you can read the car license plates, for example, but it's much too much information. And then when you uses this original photograph and puts 4 pixels into 1 pixel everywhere, and then you have a smaller level. And if you do that about 16 times, I never calculated whether 16 is the right number, then you come up with a single pixel, and in the same way, information can be prepared so that everyone understands everything that is essential about something, and he can then go down to more details if he wants to. And of course he can make money out of his having understood for the first time what is the essence of something which is very famous in science. But no one really understood it because he didn't go through the pyramid. And this is, of course, the way Einstein's mind worked. And we now come to Einstein, because Einstein is responsible for relativity theory, and also, as we already heard, for the black holes, for the warping, as it is said, of space and time. But as it turns out, the warping is not the right word. It is a pooling plus and stretching plus warping. And this pooling has somehow strangely been overlooked. And I hope you can forgive me that I'm talking about pooling again. Sorry, I had to make this joke. But what do I mean? The usual way to present a black hole is the so-called Einstein-Rosen bridge. It looks like this. It's how do we call it, a trough, which is open on the other side, and it consists of 2 parabolas, but it's rotation symmetric. You could carve it out of wood. It would be nice as a toy for children. And this is called the horizon. And people think you can throw something into a black hole, and if you're lucky, it comes up on the other side in a different part of the universe. That's one of the ideas. And there's this beautiful book by Kip Thorne called Black Holes and Time Warps of 1949. But there's no pooling here. There is just a warping of space. And now I have very briefly to describe to you how Einstein's mind worked, because it is just as hard to understand as that of a small child and a bonobo. Einstein had one really big discovery, which is the one that still gets the most resistance in the world, especially from young people who really are still able to think and not believe what the teachers tell them. And this discovery is that, let me think, what is the discovery? Yeah, it's the twin paradox. You certainly have heard about it. It's the first time in history that a human being overcame some of the barriers of the prison of space and time. Peter Weibel likes to talk about our being imprisoned in the bars of space and time. So the first glimpse of escape is due to Einstein. And I read the book titled 100 Authors Against Einstein, which was published in 1932, before the Nazis came to power. And apparently it is not really, only to a very small extent, it is anti-Semitic. It is to a large extent being horrified by a new way of thinking, which is so scary. And so they thought they had to unite against Einstein. But, and it was mostly the twin paradox, which really threw the most flack. And I have another association here. About 10 years earlier, in 1922, a guy, a physicist in Berlin, named Otto Gerke, wrote a pamphlet against Einstein. He was and he tried to disprove Einstein. And he had two elements in his criticism. One was anti-Semitism, and the other was anti-Semitism. The other was the reproach that Einstein was a solipsist. And you can remember, Einstein was so angered that he wrote a letter in the Berliner Tagblatt, I guess, in a newspaper, in which he accused Gerke of anti-Semitism. And he did not mention with a single word the real accusation he had made, namely solipsism. Why? Because solipsism was still much more, how should I say, hard to take for Einstein. It came much closer to his heart, because that is so close to what he discovered here. And the whole ideas of Einstein are very intimidating, very frightening. And to really dig out what is frightening is important. It's the most important thing in science. And it's usually only young people who are able to do that, or people who in their old age started to acquire relativity as a hobby, and thereby they could get young again. So every 10 years you have to switch your field in order to become young again, because only if you know nothing you are creative. Every artist knows that, I guess, but in science it's not very well known. Okay, the twin paradox says that you have two twins, one is moving away and comes back, and the other stays, and then the twin who has made the round trip and comes back is younger. You know the story. It's very famous. But it's not just famous, it is also very, very scary, much more scary than people usually admit. Because it's the first time, you see, here are two persons at a certain time t0, at a certain time t1, different time elements, or moments in time at the same place. And there are so many moments of conscious experience possible, including if you take out the nights when you sleep in the night. But it doesn't matter, you have a certain contingent of seconds, so to speak. And this other person arrives in the same state. He's unharmed also from this point in time to that point in time, but he or she is younger. That is, fewer seconds, fewer living moments have passed for this observer than for that. And that's the first time that the prison of space and time could really be done something to it. So persons like to trust, but also to be trusted and to be allowed to understand. And this step of understanding that Einstein took here is probably the biggest in the history of physics. If physics is important, I don't know. It's not the only thing. But you know, physics is a very poor science because it doesn't know two things, which every artist knows, of course. The first is the existence of color, if I may briefly digress. The second is the existence of now, of the nowness. The culture of the oldest culture on the planet, of the Aborigines in Australia, has the so-called snake. Sorry, can I get it? The rainbow snake, yes. The rainbow snake is a little bit like the big goddess of the people in Australia. And this culture is probably 100,000 years old. There's no older culture on the planet. And this culture the rainbow has to do with color. Now, that's called a sin, what I did. And the snake is probably the consciousness-giving instance, which is responsible for the now. I'm not sure. One can find out whether this is correct. But this is, it's the most important thing, that we are given something called color, which is not in science, not in nature, not in physics. And we're given something which is called nowness, which again is not in nature, not in science, not in physics. Both are metaphysical phenomena, but we pretend to forgive science for not telling us that they cannot say anything about it. They can only prove they don't exist. But we know it's not true. So science keeps its mouth shut so that the artists don't learn, that scientists don't know that color and nowness exist. Why did I mention this? First of all, it's very important that humanists, artists are humanists, learn something about their fellow scientists. Because scientists look just like human beings, you know. And that's all. But humanists usually never know, we never believe that scientists don't know that consciousness exists. So humanists have devoted their lives to this strange thing called consciousness or color or art or all these beautiful things. Even orgasm would still belong to the left-hand side. But scientists don't know about consciousness existing. But what is even worse, humanists don't know that scientists don't know. And since they never talk to each other, the whole science society can go on. But so maybe it's a little bit important to help the two tribes to come together again. Now, Einstein. Einstein found what we just saw, and he can prove it. It's a very simple argument, and yes, I remember how he came to it. He had a friend in Bern who happened to be, I think, 6 years older. His name was Michele Bessel. And one night they discussed all night about this problem that the speed of light should be constant, but nonetheless everyone should have equal rights in physics, which is also very surprising that equal rights in physics ever arose. So there should be, every frame should have equal rights. We talked about equal rights to persons. Now we briefly talk to equal rights for the two frames. And in the morning, Einstein went home. Then, after a few hours, he came running back to Michele Bessel's house, rang the bell, and said, "Thanks to you, I've solved the problem." He told the story in 1922, when he had just gotten his Nobel Prize of the year before, a year too late, in Tokyo. And he gave the story in German. It was translated into Japanese, and from Japanese to English. And then, according to the official statement, he said, "Thank you, I've solved the problem." But it was not thank you, it was thanks to you. But no one knows that, because all the written documents say thank you. But really, Michele Bessel helped him make the jump, this very dangerous jump. And the jump was that you know the story, that all the school teachers are forced to teach it, even if they don't understand it. And which makes them very poor guys under conditions of rigid plans, what they have to teach. But they do it, of course, obediently. But what is it that is so strange? Yes, Einstein discovered that two people who are, that if I'm standing here, then this is my simultaneity, this is how time goes for me, and this is the simultaneity of someone else, and how time goes for the other. So even at the moment we might coincide, but we never coincide completely with someone else. As you know, there are still these micro-motions of vibrations and thermal motions. So depending on just the slightest amount of difference of motion, we never live in the same time frame. And this is very scary, and this is what Gerke called solipsism. And it was so scary that Einstein could not respond to this assault, to this, how do we call it, invective of solipsism, because it stuck. You see, he couldn't say anything against it. It's like if someone had told Descartes that Marquis de Sade would be his most understanding pupil in the future. He would have been appalled, but he couldn't have done very much about it. So why did I mention that? Because it is so dramatic, because suddenly it turns out Einstein did hear something which doesn't stand alone. This I call one-point relativity. But it is, as you can imagine, possible to have also a two-point relativity. And this has never been elaborated, strangely. And if you look, for example, yes, I have a very simple example. This is the reason why I'm scaring you today. That, please forgive me, but it sounds a little bit abstract. It's almost physics now. But for a moment, you see, you can think of a spaceship which is blinking. So it's the blinking spaceship metaphor or example or paradigm. And what a spaceship can be quite long, and we think of a long spaceship like a cigar. This is, forgive me. Sigmund Freud used to say, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Okay. I learned that from Bob Rosen. It's very famous, but not many people know it. And this cigar, spaceship, is blinking. That is, it is switching on and off its lights, maybe with a message, an additional message with a, how do you call it, advertisement shown. That's so important nowadays. So the word advertisement is blinking. In time, it goes out and on. And you are standing here with your eyes. This is your eyes. And this is coming into your eyes. And this simultaneous blinking is still, some of it arrives at you in your, the image of that, if you are standing here, this is time, this is space, usual diagrams introduced by Einstein. This is moving, then this is blinking, then the light goes like this. It's called a Minkowski diagram. What I'm up to is that the length of the spaceship here is increased in the image. And formerly we had that time, when I didn't draw the same picture with time, but everybody knows that if something is moving away as here, and it's sending out light, and at a later moment, this is the time for the moving away spaceship. If it sends out light later, then this light will have a larger distance in between when it arrives here than it had when it was sent off. And this is the basis of this clock paradox that we talked about. But here we have the same phenomenon, not with time, with a vertical distance, with time, but with space, with x. And in x also the size of objects that are moving away increase. Now we can ask the very strange question, could it be that there is something similar here as here? Here you can use that to make the person come back, and then it's younger. Here you can use that to find out that you can prove that space is really bigger over there, just because of motion. And you don't need to put that into the equations. The equations were right. Einstein didn't make a mistake. He just overlooked that the equations also showed this. And since he is the Pope of the equations, everybody following him, almost everybody, except some cranks, about 100 on the planet, and most of them I don't know. But they are the creative ones, of course. These cranks realized that the equations also imply a change of size. And why did I tell you this long story? So it is not. This is called warping, and we had another word for this change of size. Stretching, I think I used. So if it is true that space cannot just be curved, as you read everywhere, as Einstein discovered, but it can also be pulled, and it is being pulled in general relativity. People know that, but they don't appreciate the pulling enough. They think it's pulled just a little bit, say some 50% or so, which is not enough. But actually, it is pulled not by a factor of 1.5, by a factor of infinity, just as you can do with time. So if this were true, then we would have a new understanding of black holes. Now, I shouldn't go into details. The essence is a picture I didn't draw yet. I meant to. We had this picture of the two. You remember this funnel? It's also called the Flamm paraboloid. Flamm's paraboloid. And now I claim this distance from outside here to inside, to the horizon, is not just as one can calculate it so far. It's not just finite, easy to bridge, but this distance turns out to be infinite. The horizon, so what is really taking place is the outside looks the same, but then here, before you reach the, when you have reached 1.5, the Schwarzschild radius, which still it's the same as in the usual understanding. But then as you come closer to the Schwarzschild radius, time is being pulled. And this pulling is so long that down here, somewhere, is infinity. And at minus infinity, there is the horizon. And this now means that nothing can ever reach the horizon in finite time. Nothing can ever come out. Nothing can ever come inside. It's a membrane, and this membrane is infinitely far away. Now you may say, okay, this is just one theory, and after 100 years you are allowed to make speculations like that. No, it's not a theory. It's something you can prove with the equations. But apart from that, it has consequences. And of course you might say, there are just 100 crackpots on the planet who have similar ideas. And I happen to be the only one with an academic position, so that no one realizes that I'm a crackpot too. The others are artists, yes. and these 100 artists need not be taken seriously, and one scientific crackpot also doesn't count if the whole Zunft, what's that in English? The whole profession thinks differently. Yes, but sometimes you know the story of the emperor and the no clothes of the famous Danish storyteller Andersen. What's his first name? Hans Christian. Yes, Andersen. Of the emperor's clothes. So if a child or an artist or an out of bounds scientist claims something, it might still be true. And even if it's 100 people who say so. And I can add, actually, it's not just one scientist, it's also two famous specialists in the field. I don't know both of them. I don't know only one of them. Adam Helfer is one of them. He proved not exactly what I just showed you, but what these two people proved. The second is Bill Unruh of this important country which we are celebrating today, Canada. And Bill Unruh also has a paper in which both of them do something which is a letdown. I have to confess to you for a moment, because one of the greatest heroes, justly, on the planet, heroes, turns out to have been wrong for once. His name is Stephen Hawking. And we talked about bonobos. They are so sweet. And Stephen Hawking is just as sweet. I mean, he's a hero, as everybody knows. And he's one of the most admirable persons on the planet. And he recently, you know, he went into a parabolic flight airplane, because no one else would have taken him out into outer space. But in parabolic flight with the Russian airplane, you can experience weightlessness. And he was filmed floating in free fall. Why did Stephen Hawking do this voyage with his respirator attached to his wheelchair? And it's very hard to understand how hard it is to live like Hawking does if you cannot move at all. Everything, also the bodily functions, have to be taken care of by nurses, and so it's very embarrassing. And he has produced wonderful science. And he has one idea which is taken very seriously by everyone. It's called Hawking radiation. And it is only this single idea of Hawking's. It has to do with radiation coming up from the black holes, here from the horizon. And therefore the mini black holes should radiate away, and one can calculate it, and they radiate away in 10 to the minus 33 seconds, which is a very short time indeed. And so any black hole produced at CERN will immediately disappear. That's what everybody believes. But these two colleagues, Adam Helfer and Bill Unruh, have voiced objections. And of course it has never been observed. It is just a belief. And this belief of Hawking's, belief with equations, it's not a very well-known term, belief with equations, but this belief with equations happens to be false if the spatial argument, analogous to the time argument of Einstein's, is correct, that I told you. And something else happens, is implied. There is no charge, suddenly, to black holes. And there is a science fiction story, which I have to mention, and which again was mentioned by Oswald Berthold to me, by David Brin. And it has a very short title. It's called Earth. And it's as impossible as I am today, I'm afraid. And it was written in 1990, and it talks about a black hole getting out of control and destroying Earth. He's just an artist, you know. Don't take him seriously. But he has a statement which is very interesting and scientific in this book, namely that one could control black holes because they are charged. And if they are charged, you can use an electric cage to confine it. Then you could kind of make it non-dangerous, like a wild animal which you put into a cage, you would be safe. And unfortunately, this undischargedness of black holes, which everybody believes, is wrong. If this, what I told you before, with the big funnel, is correct. So this I learned today, because I looked it up today, that he had this ingenious idea of keeping them using electric forces. But this unfortunately doesn't work, because the charge that goes down such a long distance loses all effect. It will be eaten and it is gone. And here I remember something very nice. I met John Wheeler. You may know who John Archibald Wheeler is. He is a pupil of Einstein's, personal pupil, and a pupil of Niels Bohr's. And the two, Bohr and Einstein, relativity and quantum mechanics, loved each other dearly and hotly, as Helen Dukas said about the two. She was the secretary of Einstein's for her whole life. And and Bohr. And so John Wheeler is a pupil of both Einstein's and Bohr's, and he also told me the nice story about the naked Einstein, which I have briefly to tell you, if you allow me. And it's really nice, because it's love. Among loving people, one may take even stories about naked bonobos and Einsteins. Namely, Bohr was visiting Princeton, and he had not announced his coming, and he wanted to see Einstein. He went to his house in Mercer Street 112 and rang the doorbell. Nothing happened. He knocked on the door. Nothing happened. He turned the door knob. It was not closed. He opened the door. He shouted. Nothing happened. He went in. He went up the staircase to Einstein's room. He knocked at the door. Einstein said, "Come in." Bohr opened. There was Einstein lying on the chaise longue, on the, how do we call it, on the sofa, and had paper and a pen in front of him, but no clothes on. And Bohr was repelled immediately because usually you don't meet someone with no clothes on. And Einstein said to Niels Bohr, "We are both adult men. Do I really have to take my clothes on?" So this is John Wheeler. Now you know him. And I'm not sure whether Bohr or Einstein told him the story. One of them. But John Wheeler coined the notion of the black hole. And as I happen to know, he thought about the black hole. It was called a frozen star at the time, for half a year. And he dropped everything he did, all his work, because he knew it would be so important to find a good name for this most interesting object in general relativity, maybe in physics. And for half a year, he was thinking day and night, especially when lying in the bathroom, in the bathtub. He told me, thinking about it. But he couldn't come up with a good name. Then he gave a talk. Maybe it was among artists. And someone in the artist shouted, "Black hole." No response. No one laughed. And everybody forgot it. Then in the night, Wheeler woke up and realized that's the right name. But it was impossible to find out who had been the attendee of this lecture, who had come up with the notion black hole. And this is how he tells the story. And then, I mean, maybe this is just a defensive story, you know. Sometimes people invent stories to be more plausible. I hope I didn't do that too often today. Then he did something to show that he is really the master over this notion, because he coined a theorem which is accepted and is part of the physics literature. You may suddenly reconsider your fields because you can make physics an art, as you will realize, because he has a theorem which is very short. A black hole, 6 words. A black hole has no hair. That's the famous no hair theorem of John Wheeler's. And there was once a German song, "Sag, ist es auch wahr, dass der Frosch hat keine Haare." Tell me whether it's true. No, I cannot continue. But so apparently he knew about the story, this German language song. After all, he was a friend of Einstein's, and he spoke German, of course. So this is the no hair theorem. What does no hair mean? It means that all the properties of all the objects that fall into a black hole get lost. Only the mass and charge and spin, that is the angular momentum, how strongly they rotate. These 3 things survive. And this he calls no hair theorem. But as it turns out now, one of the 3 hairs that are left is also not there. So So there's only 2 hairs that are surviving rather than 3. And this now we can return briefly. I have to somehow come to an end, I'm afraid. You did not yet interrupt me. You're too kind.
No, I wouldn't dare. I'm hypnotized. You go, keep going.
May I wind up fast?
I think we have about 5 or so minutes.
It's very, very sweet. At least, if you objected, I didn't hear it. but did you object?
Not at all. No, keep going,
Yeah,
please.
thank you. Objections, Your Honor. Where were we? It takes me a moment to come back. Yeah, we are in the real world suddenly again. There was this LHC, which BBC calls not the Large Hadron Collider, but the Large Hadron Collider. And then they add on the internet that sometimes the R and the D are interchanged. But I apologize for the Large On Collider. Okay. And what you see, this is the most expensive experiment of history. About 10,000 physicists are getting their bread from the experiment. And not just their current bread, 6,000 are fixed, have a fixed connection. They get their salary for life from there. But also, it's not just the current bread, it's also the bread of the future. I mean, the next funding depends absolutely on the success of this experiment. It might be the end of large-scale physical experiments if the experiment cannot be continued. So one should really have very much pity and concern with the people who work there. And they have every interest. Also, it's not known whether they will be producing black holes. There are some estimates between 1% and maybe 5–10%. That's very optimistic. And Greg Landsberg was the first to propose it's possible. And he won over slowly over the years many physicists to really think this would be the holy grail of physics. It would be the biggest achievement of physical experimentation ever. There's another thing, that's the Higgs boson. But the Higgs boson is also very important. But this new thing, Landsberg's proposal is so important because it would prove something called string theory. And string theory is the most modern theory for 30 years. 90% of all theoretical physicists have been working on string theory. It would be the first time one could confirm anything in string theory. So 30 years of a lifetime of the brightest physicists on the planet would be wasted if the experiment would not be allowed. So you see the power behind the experiment. So only if somehow the idea of benevolence could be used in a benevolent fashion and not in a cruel fashion. You see, you might say, I have used the notion of benevolence as a weapon against the LHC. That was not my intention. Benevolence, benevolently. So we should have pity with these people whose livelihood and whose future, it's not true. We should help them that another future comes. But it is really, if the bonobos in the future, or if it is not, or people who are still poor today, but are the tigers tomorrow, like the people in China, will learn that the Europeans did this experiment knowing the risk. They will never forgive it, you see. And not also your children will not forgive you that you went out of this lecture hall saying, I'm not convinced. Thank you very much for your attention.
Right. Before we open up the floor to some questions, I thought I would just pass one myself to Otto. Again, it's a very difficult process to describe this idea of matter disappearing into a black hole as the light itself curves. Objects appear to fade, etc. We read about it described in mathematical texts and science fiction, etc. I'm wondering if you say that there is about 50 months, for instance, for Hawking's radiation theory to be proved false, and therefore a micro black hole does in fact expand and start bringing in matter, what would be the effects to humans around the black hole as matter itself was actually drawn toward it? How would it appear? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for bringing me back to the hard facts. You see, there are calculations presently. They claim that even if the black holes do not evaporate, then it takes 50 million years until the planet will be eaten. Because the little black hole will grow and grow and grow, and it will produce these two jets in opposing directions, and eventually this nonlinear machinery will eat the planet, and people think it takes 50 million years. Mm. But actually, these people in nuclear physics, I wouldn't blame them, but they have never heard of chaos. They've never heard of non-linearity. Mm. And if you have something that in linear terms takes 50 million years, if it's exponential, you see, exponentially you can be much, much faster. And that explains the difference. Mm. And I have a mechanism why it must be exponential. I didn't mention that. Sorry. Mm-hmm. And I could explain if anyone wants to.
Oh, excellent. Right, well, let's open up the floor to some questions. Anyone have a question they'd like to address to Otto?
Shall I come over? Yeah.
No. Yep, there's the chap at the back there. Kim.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exponential, thank you very much. Exponential and linear. Here is time. If you linear, the bankers would be happy if there would be no interest. If everybody would just get as much money back from the bank as you put into the bank. But this is not the case banks work. Instead, they have a certain interest rate. And if your money increases by 1% per year, then after 10 years, it's not linear. After 1 year, after 10 years, it would be 10 times as much if it were linear, if it were not with interest. But exponential means with interest. So this little black hole would hit, it's very, very small. It's the tiniest thing one can imagine, 10 to the minus 33 centimeter. And it would from time to time pass through a nucleus of an atom, and within the nucleus through a so-called nucleon, and sometimes it would meet a quark. And then it would eat the quark. The quark is usually charged. And then this charged quark would disappear. And linear extrapolation would mean that it would take 50 million years, and every few seconds, one little piece of matter would be eaten by the black hole, and that would take so long. That would be linear. But if there's an after effect of eating the quark, and if there are effects on charge, I said they have no charge themselves. But if they remove charge, there will be changes in the chargedness here. And if one thinks about this for a while, it's probably the weakest point, then it turns out that you can come up with an estimate how fast this whole thing would go up. And at the present, people claim the thing is linear. But eventually, if it's big enough, like a football, like a mountain, then it will start becoming non-linear. This is accepted, but no one gives any reason why it should start only after having reached a certain minimum size. And if you move down this threshold where it starts growing non-linearly down, then you come up with this. And there's not the slightest reason not to do this pull down, which we just saw here. So that's the explanation why one has to reckon with 50 months rather than 50 million years. It's estimates, of course, but 50 months is just 4 years. but there would be a silent period. People would think the experiment has not worked because there's no radiation. So we have no black holes. And one expects to produce 10 to the 6 per year, a million one per second. And of these 1 per second, at least one or after a month or a day or a year, one will stay on Earth. And if it stays on Earth, it will start growing like that. And of course we might be lucky. And if there's no success, as I believe, as I predict, there will be no trace of a black hole because no signature, no Hawking signature arrives. But then this doesn't mean there have been no black holes. It just means they are invisible. The theory here is correct. And then when we crank up the machine and hope for more, and then the chances, of course, that the invisible things, one of them will stick, are increased. And so for 3 years, everybody will celebrate. But after 3 years, the celebration would suddenly stop. Because during the night, a satellite would discover out of the Indian Ocean a little fine light beam. And on the other side also, but that wouldn't be discovered so fast. But after a few weeks, it would also be visible by day. And then this little quasar, I call it a mini quasar. That's the mini quasar theory. Will grow, and it will do exactly as it is expected to do later. But now it will do it much, much earlier.
This would very much appear as a jet shooting out of the Earth. This is quite well proven. That if the black hole was to be sufficiently big enough, this would be like the exhaust of sorts. Kind of, yeah.
I have some problems understanding you acoustically.
Oh yes, no, it is hard.
Maybe I should come closer.
No, look, it's fine. We've got time for another couple of questions.
Oh yeah, good.
So so let's let people from the floor actually ask.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Yep, there's a chap here. There are microphones in every aisle as well. So if you wouldn't mind making your way over, that'd be great.
And please speak German if you want to.
Yes, feel free to speak German.
Ja, das würde ich gerne tun.
Ja.
Wenn ich noch mal kurz wiederholen darf, ob ich es richtig verstanden habe, was Sie da vorgetragen haben.
Ja.
Dass Sie glauben, dass die zweite Folgerung aus Einsteins Formel nicht berücksichtigt wurde und dann, dass man dieses künstlich erzeugte schwarze Loch nicht mit einem elektrischen Feld in Schach halten kann, weil es keine Ladung hat.
Ja.
Das ist also die Gefahr, die Sie sehen. Wie ist das mit Quanteneffekten, die ja so einem schwarzen Loch müsste dem ja unterliegen in seiner Größe?
Ganz richtig, das habe ich gar nicht gesagt. Die Größe von Hawking liegt darin, dass er Quantenmechanik und Relativität zusammengebracht hat. Und was ich ihm sozusagen unterstelle, ist, dass er auf der relativistischen Seite etwas übersehen hat, nämlich diese Längenvergrößerung, diese furchtbaren, unendlich langen Schlauch. Ich meine, das ist sehr absurd. Man kann das schwarze Loch herumfliegen. Man kann es sogar eventuell in die Hand nehmen. Ich meine, es geht dann durch die Hand durch, macht aber nicht viel zunächst, wenn es ganz, ganz klein ist. Aber was wollte ich sagen? Ich habe ja versucht, das aufzuschreiben. Also keine Ladung. Was war Ihr Punkt? Entschuldigung, können Sie es nochmal sagen? Ja. Richtig, ja, wegtunneln. Yeah. So tunneling away was the idea. And in quantum mechanics you have a phenomenon called tunneling. And tunneling was used by Hawking. I should briefly explain his theory maybe, because it is really at the heart of our question. If they evaporate, we are safe. So if Hawking is right, we are safe. So if you wish, this whole thing boils down to Hawking being right or not. I did send him my manuscript. He did not reply for 4 months or 3 months now. But of course, not every paper that is being sent to him will be read to him by the people who help him. And he will not have interest in any paper, in every paper. So maybe he doesn't know about my manuscript, even though I sent it to him. I sent it also to Penrose, of course. But Hawking says that there can be so there are these pair creation in quantum mechanics. Sometimes you have a positive and negative pair, positron, electron. They arise out of nothing due to quantum mechanical fluctuations. Then one of the two can go inside the black hole and the other can go out. And since nothing was there before and something comes out, the black hole, which is down here, must have lost something. So this is negative energy which goes in. Therefore, the black hole is evaporating, and he could calculate that this is very fast when they are very small. Only if the horizon is infinitely far away, you cannot have this situation that anything goes in. And pair creation, the pairs will never come, the horizon will never be finished in finite time. So because there is no horizon in finite time, because it takes infinite time to form, because this is a step which I didn't mention, that if the horizon is infinitely far away, then the formation of the horizon also takes infinitely long time, because for anything to get there, it has to travel an infinite distance. But I should also say another counter-argument against what I said. There's a famous theorem, well accepted, to which I'm contradicting. The theorem says that you can fall into a black hole in finite time. We'll read this everywhere. So there's the horizon. An astronaut can fall in finite time, but light to fall in is known to take infinite time. Light is known, that's accepted. So there are two accepted truths. One is an astronaut can fall in finite time. Second, light takes infinite time to reach the horizon or to come out of the horizon. This is well known, the equations are known. And people say that is because the clock of the astronaut goes slower and slower. So in his own clock time, they claim it's finite. But for light, it's infinite. And you realize that's the only time where one has just a disjunction between light and bodies. And even if it were true, it's not true, I'm sure, but that's my opinion. I can prove it, but no one else believes me, perhaps. But even if it were true that time is so much elongated in the falling astronaut, that even though light takes an infinite time, he, in his own clock, does not. Of course, he does not arrive before the light. That is, it takes him also an infinite time watching from the outside. This is well known, but for some reason people didn't realize that this logically implies that the whole thing can never be reached. At least, of course, from our point of view, you could say this astronaut believes he reaches it in finite time. He cannot return anyhow. If he tried to, it would take him infinite time to come back. But that's not logical. He should also come out in finite time again, but then there would have been infinite time passed. But also that is not true. I can prove that this theorem is false, if it helps you something. And I wrote a paper on that before I wrote the other paper where I warned of the black hole. And I can give you the reason, which is very simple. If this distance is infinite, then c, the famous constant that Einstein worked with, the speed of light, is constant. And you might say, but everybody knows that c is constant. The answer is no. Up to general relativity. In general relativity, c is not constant anymore. But this was an oversight of Einstein's. He was reluctant. He was unhappy that c is not constant. But since he didn't look at the size change in the same way as he looked at the time change, he overlooked that c can remain constant. And this claim that c is constant in general relativity was made in 1912 by his close friend Max Abraham, not close friend but good friend, Max Abraham, who was appalled that Einstein was ready to give up the constancy of the speed of light. But Einstein he couldn't give in to Abraham for psychological reasons. Therefore, he formulated his theory in a way which proved Abraham wrong. But he need not have done that. The theory doesn't change. It's only the interpretation. And so here the interpretation, the new interpretation says Abraham is correct. And because of Max Abraham, who died in 1922 or 24, relatively early, Einstein tried to give him his chair in Zurich when he left from Zurich to Berlin. And Abraham influenced Einstein several times at crucial points in his career. So this whole theory you could call a Max Abraham type version of general relativity, and the final neatly written down equations, which must be equivalent but rewritten, have not yet been written down, only in a special case. And this special case, for that I have a manuscript. But now this was very defensive and the jargon of physicists, but you need not take me for a physicist. I'm just a normal person, so so it might be wrong, of course, everything.
Well, I think unfortunately we're reaching the end of our of our session. So I think there are two good opportunities to continue talking with Otto. One is that downstairs there's actually a piece, a program by the name of the Third Term Music, which actually deploys in the piece one of Otto's theorems, that of the Rössler attractor. You can actually see it, I suppose, in action downstairs. You can also continue talking with him, I suppose, there or out in the foyer. But, yep, that's right.
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'd like to thank Otto for that talk.
Thank you very much. Very, very much. Thank you.
Thank